Hello everyone, this is Rashmi Bhure discussing with you today a very intense topic, and that is the topic of partition. I am going to basically look at how partition has impacted women and how displacement has been one of the larger impact of partition. Partition of India 1947 led to the death of thousands and lakhs of people. It turned into a very, you can say, bloody conflict of this region. It led to displacement, looting, rape, chaos, resulting in the division of India into another country, and that is India and Pakistan, two new countries emerged in South Asia. We can say that partition was one of the turning events or tragic events of this continent, which has turned the politics of this region forever. And the long shadows of partition are still seen when we talk of India-Pakistan relations. Bapsi Sidhwa, who has written the Iceman Candy book, she says that all wars are fought on women's bodies. Absolutely right. We see that sexuality of women has been used all over the world in various or in different conflicts, and particularly in South Asia also we see this. And of course India's partition is no exception, where women's bodies have been used as tools to settle the conflict. The word izzat or honor is very much associated with women's body, and to attack another nation, the countries have used the women's bodies, and that is where rape is one of the very sad outcome of many of the conflicts, and same is applied for partition also. Partition had a profound impact, we know that, on millions of people and their lives. Almost 12 million people crossed the border from both sides of the border, that is from Pakistan to India and from India to Pakistan. Naturally, it had a lot of huge impact on social, political, economic, or even culturally. The whole social fabric of India was torn apart because of partition. According to the famous historian Musharraf Hassan, no other country in the 20th century has witnessed two opposing movements occurring simultaneously. If one was a popular nationalist movement, that is India's freedom movement, unique in the annals of world history for ousting the colonials through non-violent means, the other in its underbelly was a counter movement of partition, marked by violence, cruelty, bloodshed, and mass displacement. And so obviously, for a young nation like India to negotiate between one, a tragic moment or a mourning, and other, freedom, was very difficult or challenging in 1947. We see that this tragic event has been captured very well by historians, political scientists, sociologists, literary writers. They have all documented partition very, very effectively. But somehow, filmmakers on both sides of the nation have been little, you can say, reluctant immediately to respond to this event. What happened immediately after partition, specifically when we have to talk about the film world, was that the film world, both in Lahore as well as in Bombay, they were totally disturbed or destabilized. Many of the famous artists at that time, musicians at that time, they were in a dilemma whether to live in Bombay or to go to Pakistan, the new nation that was formed for the Muslims. We know that many of the famous artists, singers like Noor Jahan, she shifted to Pakistan because this was a new nation and there is some kind of attraction which the Muslims then had, and so many of the people who were working in the industry in Mumbai, in Bombay then, they shifted to Pakistan for a new search for probably a new identity. This was, we can say, after 47, a lull period in the Bombay film industry, and there was a lot of depressing atmosphere here, because people were wondering that now what will happen to the Bombay film industry when a lot of filmmakers, producers, directors, writers, they moved to Pakistan. But when you feel that things are coming to a near end, always there is a new beginning. As the lot of Muslim artists, they shifted from Bombay to Pakistan, similarly the Lahore industry, which the then Punjab, which then was merged with Pakistan, so from there also lot of young artists, they moved to India and they came and joined the Bombay film industry. So we can see there was also a migration of artists during this period. We see that all these experiences, the tragic experiences of partition, were penned down immediately or within few years by some of the famous writers, because these writers had witnessed themselves the whole partition, the trauma of partition. Either they had witnessed it or they had experienced themselves, or many of them had migrated also from Pakistan, the new Pakistan, to India. Some of the names that we can take here is that of Khushwant Singh, Saddat Hasan Manto, Amruta Pritam, Bapsi Sidhwa and Bhishma Sahani. And their partition writings are considered to be today very scholarly writings which are studied across the world. In latter years, we see that it is these literary works which have been adapted by filmmakers, and they have made films based on these works. The whole film world, we can say, for immediately in the first decade after India's independence, was silent on partition. We can conclude here and say that the film world was probably trying to negotiate with what happened in 47. This was a very dark moment or a period for them to even make film on it. And that is why there was a complete silence. There was a taboo on this topic. Nobody wanted to touch this sensitive topic because people wanted to forget those bad memories. It was almost, we can say, 15 years later that first in 1961 or around that time, films like Chaliya and Dharmaputra come, where we find that the topic of partition, we see the references here, or partition and communalism, and how partition and it was connected to the new social reality of India, or what kind of communal problems India faced after partition. So these reflections we can see in Yash Chopra's film Dharmaputra in 1961. But till then, the filmmakers had not touched much this topic. Still, we would say that the whole decades of 1960s, except for a few films, not many films were even talking about partition. And one of the main reasons could be for this is that 1950s India was totally engrossed in the whole process of nation building, and the nation building or construction of nation itself is such a positive thing to happen, that at such a positive time, or when Nehru's India, where the young generation was together in this process of nation building, at that time people wanted to simply wink their eyes to what happened in the past. This period in the Indian history was something which people wanted to totally delete at that time, or ignore at least for some time. The Indian cinema saw new wave cinema around the decades of 1970s, when the urban youth were largely coming into filmmaking and considered that films are not merely for entertainment, but films have to be more realistic in nature. And this wave of realism which came into the Indian cinema in the decades of 1970s, we find here a young boy, M.S. Sathyu, entering into the film world, and his hands are, he looks at the one of the unpublished story of Ismat Chuktai, and that story really appeals him. And M.S. Sathu decides to make uh, a film on this unpublished work, and the film became a historic film or a landmark film in the Indian film history. Uh, in 1977, the film was Garam Hawa. The film Garam Hawa, you can say, is one of the first films which totally focuses on partition or various issues that partition had thrown up at that time. Garam Hawa also uh, tells us or narrates to us the problems that the Muslims faced in India when they stayed back here after partition. Salim Mirza's family, who lived in Agra then, how did they negotiate with the changed India? The new identities which were, dumped on them or which they were forced to take. How did they negotiate with that? How did they feel when each of their family members moved to Pakistan? How they were displaced from their homes? Salim Mirza's mother, for whom home and nation was almost same, how she refused to leave their Haveli in which she was living for more than 50 to 60 years. How Salim Mirza's daughter commits towards then suicide when, due to the new drawn borders, her each of the relationship fails. So the impact of partition on women, whether it was women of older generation or whether it was young girls, how totally their lives became topsy-turvy after partition, and how the Muslims, they faced various onslaught at that time. The film brings out this very, very important issue. Of course, the film ends at a very positive note, saying that how the Muslims have to join the mainstream of India, whether it's a social mainstream or a political mainstream, and merge themselves in this country. The second important work comes in 1988 of Bhishma Sahani, that is Bhishma Sahani's famous novel Tamas, and this novel was adapted by Govind Nihalani. First he made a tele-serial on this with the same name, Tamas, and of course later it was turned into a short film. Tamas also brings the violence that erupted during the time of partition, and how people traveled from, they left their houses and traveled either to India, or Indians who also went back to Pakistan. So the kind of violence that they suffered on the way, and how they negotiated with that violence, or how they experienced and still survived through this violence, and how they also amidst that violence saw certain human faces. The film very, very effectively brings out that. So both these films, Tamas as well as Garam Hawa, is a stark commentary on the issue of displacement or the trauma that people that time experienced in 1947. Moving to the next phase, that is after the globalization in the decades of 90s, we see that with the winds of globalization, a lot of things were changing in India. The Indian economy was slowly picking up. But at the same time, in the decades of 90s, we see that India-Pakistan relations were very, very tensed. There were constant conflict in the relationship. So on one hand, we see that the Indian economy was on rise, India was doing much better, was trying to establish herself in the global world. But on the other hand, India's relationship with her neighbor was deteriorating. At this backdrop, we see that the commercial cinema now gathered a lot of courage to bring this sensitive issue into the film world. And here we need to take name of Raj Kapoor and his film Hina, which was made in 1991. Though Hina, you can say by and large is a love story, but it's a love story, we can say, which was made at the backdrop of India-Pakistan border issues and the cross-border terrorism that was happening then. At that backdrop, this love story comes. Another interesting work comes from Shyam Benegal in 1994, and that is Mammo. Mammo portrays a struggle of an ordinary woman who wants to, who was departed during the time of partition from her family members, and who wants to now cross the border to come to meet her family members after many, many years. And what are the various struggles which she faces due to the border issue between India and Pakistan? The film brings out that story very well. Another literary work that has been adapted, and that work was of Khushwant Singh, his novel Train to Pakistan, that was adapted for the film in 1998. Khushwant Singh wrote this novel way back in 1956, but the film was made much later in 1998. This film also portrays and tells us that how Sikhs and Muslims were having a very harmonious relationship before partition in the border village of Mano Majra, but how partition changed their relationship totally, and how these two sections of the society fell apart and their relationship deteriorated after partition. Another work which we need to talk here is the 1998-1947 film Earth. This was directed by Deepa Mehta, and this is also taken from the literary work of Bapsi Sidhwa. Bapsi Sidhwa's semi-biographical novel Iceman Candy, the film is made on that particular novel. The film brings various shades, and very interestingly it brings the roles of Parsis at that time, which I don't think so any other film is bringing out so effectively. That how, what kind of sufferances the Parsis faced, or what was their role at the time of partition, the film brings out that. The film also tells that how the relationship between the Sikhs, Hindus and Muslim friends deteriorate and in fact become very dark after the partition, when the whole socio-political as well as the economic fabric changes on both sides of the border. And how once again in this film the women's bodies have been attacked, and one of the main protagonists of the film, she's been raped. That is what they have shown in the film, just because you want to attack the honor of another community or another country. The film 1947 Earth also, we can say here, is very different in the sense that the whole film is taken from the perception of a small child, baby Lenny. So how children at that time looked at partition, and how that violence of partition impacted their lives forever. The film brings that very well. After 2000, we see that few more aspects or issues of partition have been brought out in cinema, and here one of the interesting works that came in 2000 is of Hey Ram. Kamal Hassan has played the main protagonist in the film, and the film juxtaposed between partition and the present communal problem in India. There are a lot of common threads between the two, which the film tries to establish. The film uses South Indian characters to unite a pan-Indian sentiment towards the topic of partition, and that is where in all of the partition films we can say Hey Rams becomes a little different film, because it tries to link the contemporary to the past. Refugee, though not a partition film out and out, J.P. Datta's film Refugee, but we can say the whole concept of refugee, which also emerged after partition, this concept is reflected in this cinema, where the refugee, the character portrayed in the cinema, who is not able to identify himself either with Pakistan or with India. He is himself questioning about the concepts like nationalism, or how to negotiate with these new adapted concepts, and the film Refugee talks about that. Another popular film, Gadar Ek Prem Katha, which was made in 2001, this film particularly becomes very important in the sense that this film was made after the Kargil war, and so the anti-Pakistan sentiments were already extremely strong at that point of time in India, And at that backdrop, a film like Gadar Ek Prem Katha is being made and the film becomes super duper hit. The film becomes super duper hit because the film stirs up anti-Pakistan feeling once again, uh, very very strongly, and the film brings out different notions of identity, nationalism, and the film also constructs the other, and here the other is Pakistan, and the film was really taken up by the Indian audience because it justified the post Kargil, the feeling which was then in India, and that people felt is reflected in the cinema. Though cinema was basically post partition, what happens when people, some of the girls, they were left in the places where they were, they were departed from their families, and one such girl who is left in India and her family moves to Pakistan, it is basically the story about her. Two serious works came around the same period. One is Pinjar, which was made in 2003, again based on the literary works, and second is Khamosh Pani. Both these films also talk about the impact of partition on women. Film Pinjar raises the question of women's identity in the changed atmosphere after partition, especially the issue of abduction of women, because this was one of the important issues at the time of partition, that several number of women were abducted by the other community, and what happened to these women when they were abducted. Some of them were forced to marry to men from other community, some of them were simply raped, some of them were raped and they were simply dumped. So here in film Pinjar, we find one of the female protagonists when she is abducted, Hindu Punjabi girl, when she is abducted by a Muslim man, then what happens? And after partition, the abduction, the women who were being abducted, there were certain laws made for them, the return policies that were made for them, and that is where in the end of the film, when Urmila Matondkar, who plays the main protagonist role, when she comes to the border and her brother comes to receive her, she refuses to go back, and that is where she questions that how many times will I change my identity. So women's identity, which were totally shadowed during the time of partition, Pinjar brings out very intensely this issue. The second film, Khamosh Pani, the very title itself is very effective. Silent Waters brings out the issues when the other community came to abduct women or to rape them. Many of the families, to save the izzat of their families, forced the women folks to jump into the wells to save the izzat of the family. Some of the girls, they themselves jumped into the well, and one such girl, when she goes to jump into the well, and at that point of time she returns back. She refuses to jump into the well. Probably she was not getting that courage to commit suicide, or maybe there are some other reasons, but she returns back from that point, and then how she lives, how this Punjabi girl, she lives in Pakistan by changing her total identity, and when her son comes to know about her original identity, then what kind of clashes come in her life, or what kind of new things that she has to face in her life, and how she struggles with that. So once again, a film like Khamosh Pani talks about issues like fundamentalism, impact of partition on women, as well as how women have negotiated with all those situations, and how the women have also suffered during partition. The film brings out that. Another commercial film that also we can talk on the same lines, and that is 2004 film Veer Zara. Veer Zara again brings out a very different issue from probably the earlier films that have come. Veer Zara talks about the issue of mistaken identity, and how a Hindu boy, he lands up in Pakistan jail due to the issue of mistaken identity, and how the new borders create a problem in his life, and how he separates from his from the girl whom he is loving. And here the film plays between the love story of an Indian boy and a Pakistani girl, and how they ultimately meet in the end. If you look at 2004 film Zara, the film ends at a positive note, because this film also talks about the confidence building measures between India and Pakistan, which were initiated during the time of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So somewhere that positivism the filmmaker wanted to convey to people, that beyond border, beyond boundaries, love can bring people together. And it is people to people contact that can bring India and Pakistan more closer. There would be always some political disputes, there would be always border questions and issues, but it is the people who can, bring some kind of confidence building measures. So, Veer Zara ends at that positive note. To sum up, I can say that in last 30-40 years, many films have been made on the topic of partition, and in future also maybe many more works, interesting works will come from the film world on partition, because this is one area which I would say, though some of the interesting works have come, but still there is a lot of scope to still tap many more sub themes of partition in the in various films that the filmmakers are making in India. But all these films which have been made till now have been made from some perception. It is narrating either the stories or the sufferances of women, or it is narrating how the children looked at partition, or it is narrating the experiences that the Hindus faced at that time, or it is narrating the experience that the Muslims faced at that time. But definitely we can say that partition changed some of the concepts for people at that time. Concepts of home, concepts of nation, and concepts of identity. The new concepts of nationhood, the new concepts of borders and boundaries, with which people on both sides of the borders were negotiating. I think these challenges are something which the film world has tremendous scope to further work in future. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to my channel to look at few more new videos that will be coming in few weeks. Thank you.